Hi, Alex. Thank you so much for coming on the Art of Living Well podcast today. We just love connecting and meeting like-minded people who have really dedicated their lives to sharing your experiences and your learnings with others with the goal of making this, this planet a better place for all.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we dive in and talk about all things, including your latest book, we would love to ask you one question. If there were no financial or time constraints, what would you treat yourself with today?
Oh, wow. I probably would jump on a private jet and go to the Maldives and get in some 80-degree water and surf for 3 or 4 hours, and then get on the private jet and come back here and get on my horse for a while, eat dinner with my family and call it a day. I think that's what it would be. So, I mean, no time, no money's constraints. Great. Perfect. Let's do a 24-hour private jet experience to the Maldives. How about that?
Okay, well, that's a first for us. And as far as and that sounds amazing. It's funny you say the Maldives because my daughter has been obsessed with going to the Maldives because she's worried also that the Maldives will not be there.
Will not be there. Yeah, no, it's a beautiful place. We've been a few times. And
okay.
It's
how far is it from California?
From us, it's like a 30-hour trip. I mean, you got to fly. You generally fly from Los Angeles to Doha, and then you have to take a couple, regional things to get to where you want to be. And after the boat transfers and all that, it's a trip for sure. Yeah. So you have to commit,
it's not a one-day trip.
No. And you get there and you're exactly 12 hours, at least for the West Coast here, you're exactly 12 hours opposite. Right.
Okay.
So 8 a.m. here is 8 p.m. there.
Right.
So it's quite an adjustment, but well worth it.
That's awesome.
I'll add that to my bucket list.
Yeah, it's on for sure on my bucket list. So, Alex, we know you've had like a very unique path to get to where you are today. And we'd love to hear about some of your insights and pivotal moments and experience that have influenced your career journey and ultimately resulted in you writing this fantastic book, Ordinary Soil.
Well, the short version of that is that I grew up in a really conservative family, not religious per se, but sort of like you go to college and you go to business school and you get a job and you kind of take that route, and which my sister did. And I kind of went that way. I went to UCLA and I got a degree in business economics from UCLA. And then I moved out to Boston and I went to work for a financial services firm. And I lived in the middle of in a loft apartment, like above a bar. And it was really, I'm fairly introverted-ish, I mean, I like home and like playing the guitar and that kind of stuff. So living above this bar was a bit challenging. And it was my first time really away from home. I mean, of course, I went away to college, but when you move across the country, it's a whole different thing.
Right.
So I was working for a mutual funds company and living in this loft apartment. Back then we had clock radios, right? We didn't have phones. And so the clock radio went off for work, and it was a song that I'd never heard called Trapped. It was Bruce Springsteen. And I listened to this song and was laying there in bed. And by the time I got to the sax solo in this song, I realized I was just so inspired. I'd realized what I had to do with my life, so to speak. And so I got up, I mean, much to the chagrin of everybody else. I got up and went to work, and I quit my job and that day. And I gave him 2 weeks. No plan. I mean, you're 22, right? What do you mean? You're just flying. What are you going to do? So I quit my job. I moved across the country. I picked up a little dog and a black lab puppy in Utah, and ended up after a couple pit stops in Seattle, which is where I went to work for. Well, I mean, I was trying to be a musician, right? That's kind of part of this story. I didn't know anything about that world, really. I knew I liked to write. I knew I liked to play and sing and that kind of stuff. I didn't know anything else. I got a temp job, and I had to make some money. And the first place they sent me was, this is kind of a crazy story. The first place they sent me, these people, there's like 10 people working at this company, and they were all gathered around a computer listening to like some tinny audio, right? It didn't sound very good. And it turned out it was the first live broadcast of anything over the internet, which was a Seattle Mariners game,
Oh, wow.
right? But I didn't really understand how big of a deal it was, but I was like, wow, it just kind of sounds like crap. But okay, like the internet was in its infancy, and it turned out that the company I had been sent to created the technology that lets us stream audio and video over the internet.
Wow.
Yeah, I had no clue, right? It was called Progressive Networks, and then it changed the name to Real Networks. It was in a little loft space in Pioneer Square in Seattle for a long time. So that was my first place I got sent, and I never left. And there are a couple of musicians worked there, and I got together with them, and that set me off on learning about how the music business worked, kind of without knowing how. And that's eventually within 2 years. Might have been 2.5 years. I quit my job there and start doing music full time. And I did that for a long time until 2010 or 11. And you and we all talked offline about this a bit when I got a letter from a fan that I wrote a song about with a buddy. And that one song about a letter turned into this whole project where we write songs about people's letters. And I wrapped those songs and letters into a book. I'd never written a book, but figured I didn't know what this project was, but I might as well kind of like encapsulate it in with prose and backstories and stuff. I did that, and we did a charity event for it here in San Diego, and somebody was in the audience, and this you guys will know this person. Somebody was in the audience. They handed it off to this guy named Wayne Dyer, who was the kind of the godfather, I guess, of the self-help movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Wayne read it in a sitting, and within, I don't know, maybe it was 2 months of that, I had this book deal, and never written.
Wow.
Isn't that a crazy story? Yeah. So with Hay House, which is like big,
I know Hay House
publisher. Yeah. So Reed Tracy had told me, who ran Hay House, told me that it was like his favorite book that they were ever going to have, and so he signed me to a 3-book deal, and I went out on the road with Wayne, and he kind of became a mentor for me, and he was one of my best friends until he died in 2015 now, I think it was, or 2016, 2015, I think. Anyway, that was a whole other turn, right? And I could like use my songwriting and my performing and that kind of stuff with Wayne. I ended up writing a song for him with his daughter that he sang to her on a PBS special that was really still is moving for me. And so once that journey kind of faded in 2017 or 2018, just because of the nature of things, I kept doing the For the Sender deal, but I just started writing on my own too. And so I put out a couple of memoirs that were pretty successful. I mean, they were well received as far on the indie level. And then that led us to where you and I are talking today, which is this book called Ordinary Soil. There's another crazy random story, but I was surfing in Fiji, and right when the pandemic hit, it was in March of 2020, and nobody knew what that was yet, really. Like, we didn't really know any grasped the levity of the situation. So there was, a few of us on this island surfing, and there was a medic on the island. And while we were there, California shut down, at which point everyone was like, okay, now this is definitely a thing happening. We had to get repatriation flights home. But before we got those flights, this medic said, hey, if you guys want to know what this coronavirus thing is, I can explain it to you. And we're like, well, we just thought he was like, a lifeguard / EMT guy, and so what's he going to know? What's he going to know about this? And he got up and like gave this whole presentation, and it was mind blowing. And it was clear that this guy was he was something else, because I hadn't really spent any time with him. And it turned out he was a triple board certified MD named Zach Bush, who had kind of started changing tack and focusing on regenerative agriculture and like the core reasons for human disease and that kind of stuff. But he explained the coronavirus to us, and he like in retrospect, he was like, this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and it all happened.
Wow.
And he seemed, in retrospect. So I got home thinking, who the hell is this guy? And looked him up and found out that he's definitely not your average bear as far as people go. And I saw like an animated podcast of him with Rich Roll. So it was a conversation with him and Rich Roll, who's another podcaster, and somebody had drawn it out. It's like an after school drawing. It was really cool. But it was a conversation which is not the sexiest sounding topic, but it was the history of chemical and mechanical agriculture in the US. But the way that they talked about it, or he talked about it, was incredible. And I'd never like heard that story before, about like the roots from like indigenous farming up until where we are now. And there wasn't a lot of judgment in the conversation. He was just like saying, oh, this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And there was video going along. And I don't know, I thought it was so powerful. And I thought that story, if it was fictionalized in a way, could reach way more people. And a lot of the people that would need to hear it, some of the people that the most would need to hear it, that would be the least likely to, if they read it, or they saw it in a book, or saw it in a movie or something like that, it might hit a little harder. And so I put together like a 1-page idea. I had this quick idea of maybe telling the story of this indigenous, a family that starts out with an indigenous patriarch in Oklahoma and farms the same piece of land all the way up till now, right? And tell the story of that family all the way from the 1860s or 80s or whatever up till present day. And I sent it to him and to Zach, and he thought it was a great idea. And I started working on it, and he collaborated pretty heavily, especially like on the medical and the science side of stuff. And I had a very specific intent with this book, which was not to make it like a medical journal or scientific or anything like that. I wanted you as a reader to have no idea what you were reading until you got to the end, right? Meaning that you would get so into this plot and so into this family and what was going on that like the real message of it wouldn't hit until you got 20 pages left. And then you're like, what? It's kind of this, I don't know. I felt like that would be a good way to communicate this message to folks that might, be bristle at it at first, like, first of all, just from a dry scientific standpoint, not everybody wants to read about like soil composition and that kind of thing, and also from like, there's been, lately, well, not lately, it's been going on for a while, but when Bayer was Monsanto, they produced this weed killer we all know called Roundup, right, which has this chemical in it called glyphosate. And so there's been billions of dollars in lawsuits settled already, right, up until now, which indicates some sort of sense of wrongdoing. And I didn't want to focus on that kind of thing too heavily. I didn't want to like politicize this story. I didn't want to make it, I wanted it to be like the most accessible possible story. And that's what I focused on for the first 75% of the book. And then Zach, would help me out with making sure making sure my ducks were in a row. And that was it. I finished it. I wrote it as a novella, which is only like 25,000 words, and sent it to a couple of people and that I respect. And they both said, and they were in the publishing world, and they said, this needs to be a novel. And so, which would be about 3 times that, about 75,000 words. So I went back to the drawing board and I made it 75,000 words and started sending it around and seeing if anybody would be interested in helping me get it out into the world. And we made some good partnerships, and, Zach took it and gave it to people. That's how Woody Harrelson got endorsed the book. Oh yeah, there it is. It was a crazy story, even how it came into existence, but very already it seems to have been. It came out in October, and books are, famously, as you guys know, they're famously slow burning kind of things. You know, you can't, that's the beautiful thing about them in a way, is they literally, like, the literal word of mouth is very powerful still, right? It's not all about posting and what you might share digitally, right? It's like, it's somebody seeing it in an airport, you know what I mean? It's like that kind of stuff. And so I got lucky with that opportunity too, because it was in all the airports, and it was in like 60 airports in the country on in caps for a few months early in the year, which really helped too, because I think the cover's pretty compelling, and the Woody Harrelson quote helped, and people picked it up, and probably the exact kind of folks that I was trying to reach, right? That might not be open to. I wasn't interested in reaching the people that were already into Zach Bush or already into that kind of world. You know, I was interested in reaching people like me, who I didn't know Zach was. I didn't know him from Adam until I went on the surf trip, you know? So anyway, that's my life in a however long that took.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
Well, you've had so many, just unique experiences in the serendipity of all this and how it has all played out with you meeting Zach and other people. We've had the honor and privilege of interviewing Zach on this podcast.
Oh, cool.
About a year and a half ago. I've done his Journey of Intrinsic Health coaching program. So I am.
Oh, cool. You're familiar, right?
We're very familiar.
We're in.
We're all in. We've got the Ion Gut Support, just a shout out for that. Which is like drinking dirt, right? Getting to the dirt in the soil.
Yeah.
But that said, the book was it was such an easy read, and you were drawn into the characters very early on. And to your point, that's how to get the message out to the masses, because not everyone wants to. And quite frankly, even though we're into it, I would just rather pick up and read a historical fiction novel than a heavy, dense scientific book. And, we've interviewed regenerative farmers on our podcast. So I think hopefully most of our listeners are kind of have some baseline understanding as we kind of continue on this conversation. But, maybe you can start to share just examining our relationship with the earth and the environment, and paying closer attention to what we put into our bodies, how we buy our food, all that, and start to dig into why that's so important and what you learned as you started to peel back layers and research and talk with Zach.
Yeah. I think you just mentioned, like, the characters in this book, like I chose them very intentionally, obviously. And there's like a Zach kind of character in there.
Oh, there is.
This guy named Mark. And, but the focus of the book is this guy named Jake, who's a farmer. He's like the latest generation farmer. And he's kind of everything that you read about that isn't right now in our culture, in terms of he's got an opioid addiction. He's a drinker. He drinks too much. He's obese. He's not healthy. He's got all these different ailments that are popping up as a result of his lifestyle choices, and which is an important thing, right? That's an important thing to mention. These are the choices that he's been making. And now, granted, he might not know any better, but these are the choices that he's making. And so the book starts with him kind of reaching his end and realizing, at least he's telling himself that he's not of value anymore, and he's not of value to his family. His farm's, dying off, and so he's got a life insurance policy, and he tries to kill himself right at the beginning of the book, right? That's like the first thing that you get into. And those problems he's got right away. I spell that stuff out very quickly. But then the book jumps back to, I think it's 1890. I'd have to go back and look, but jumps back to that original, like, Choctaw patriarch, and the way that he farms the land. And so the idea here is to draw a contrast between that way of treating the earth and the way that this guy who's just tried to kill himself treats the earth, And I'm very careful in the book not to assign a lot of blame, not even to Monsanto or companies like that. There's not a lot of blame going on. And so this character, whose name is Jake, we never see him in that light, like, being in the light of being shamed or being blamed for his choices, which is really important, because I think that, for the most part, a lot of us are doing the best we can with what we know, right? And what our constraints might be. And so the rub comes when you do know better, right? And so that's what the book tries to do, and what your guys' podcast tries to do is try to like shine a light on other ways of living and other ways of treating the planet and each other and everything that might lead to deeper, more fulfilling, happier lives, which is kind of the point, right? That's what we're all trying to do. So so between like this patriarch and the way he treats the land, which is this it's an old native practice called the Three Sisters, right? Which is where you plant corn, beans, and squash all at once, and they basically serve each other as you're not as you're harvesting them, but as you're growing them, they serve each other. Like the corn stalks grow up, and the beans can use the stalks for to grow, and the squash covers the ground and keeps moisture in and keeps it from heating up too much. That kind of idea. That's kind of like the basis of regenerative agriculture in a way. Over the next generations, as this book kind of goes on, it gets farther and farther away from that. And again, most of these farmers are just doing the best they can with what's provided, with whatever new technologies are coming up, right? Fertilizer, for example, like coming in right out of World War I. The World War II is really when it started hitting. But the point being that as these things become available, including pesticides and herbicides, that kind of thing, they help, right? I mean, they increase productivity. They help the bottom line for these farmers. They're going to use them. Not a lot of research is done at this point in time. We're talking like 40s through the 90s as to like the long-term ill effects. And so if it works, folks are going to use it. So that's what happens in the book. And then, once we get into like the 1990s, people start seeing some problems. And I talk about that in the book later on, like incidents of, Alzheimer's, which my mother has, and Parkinson's and all sorts of neurodegenerative diseases start all kind of coming to a head at once. And I won't want to create too many spoilers in this book, but the point is that's my dog, Emma, by the way. You might see. She likes to come and hang out. The point is that the way that we've treated the land all the way up till now is having, a very direct impact on our bodies, on the planet itself, of course, but also on our health as humans. And I focus on glyphosate a bit because that's kind of where the most research has been done, and that's not, I wouldn't say easy target, but it's it's pretty clear what it's doing to our planet and to people's health. And so I think I say the word glyphosate like once or maybe twice in the book, right? Yeah. I never say Monsanto, I never say Bayer, I never bring those companies up. But I do, but towards the end, I do bring in the idea of glyphosate and what it's done to human health. And it's a really simple like idea that we forget, which I think we might have talked about offline, which is that, you get in, or I wrote to you about this, like you get out what you put in, right? And it's such a simple idea, but it's so true. I mean, it's true with a plant. Your plant, right. It's true with something as like physical as that, but it's true with, your emotional state and your mental state, your intellectual state, your physical state, everything. Like it's all, it's a very direct, effect. And so,
and it's really simple. Like I've been thinking about that since I think I read it in your book somewhere, or heard it on a podcast. I don't know where I saw it that you said that. And it's so basic, like you said, but when you think about it, it's so true. Like if you're going to eat a Hostess cupcake, you're putting that in your body. What is that going to do to your body over time?
Yeah. And it's okay. You know what? You want to eat a Hostess cupcake? Great. Yeah. Go for it. But there's going to be a consequence. Right. And that's the other big part of this, right? It's like that's where the knowing better thing kind of kicks in. You can do whatever the heck you want to do. Yeah. There's going to be a consequence, good or bad, like that is, you learn that obviously if you're a parent, you learn that to anything, to a kid, to a dog, to whatever, like the most effective way to kind of like explain how the world works is that there's consequences to your behavior, like good and bad, both ways. And sometimes you get unlucky. Sometimes bad stuff happens. You know, it happens to all of us. And but for the most part, the choices that you make every day have a consequence, and it's your job in running your life to decide whether or not it's worth it. Right. That's what it comes down to.
And that's really one of the key messages of the book, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's definitely
right there. That's
it. You know,
that's it.
It's not saying don't do this.
Right.
It's not saying, don't eat a Twinkie, or, you have to live in this particular way. You have to wake up and you got to do 15 minutes of meditation and then do some yoga and then like go into La La Land. Like that is not, I spent, as we talked about offline, I spent many years in the self-help world, like with Hay House, which is the biggest publisher independently of that kind of material. And Wayne Dyer was a mentor of mine, who was kind of like the godfather of the movement, which he had a problem with by the time it got to the later stage of his life, what it had turned into, right? Which is a lot of people, walking around thinking they're authorities on things, telling you how to do something. And he had a big problem with that because that wasn't his gig, right? Mm-hmm. His gig was like aggregating. He was like an aggregator of information. He would take in all these stories and figure out a way to tell them to you in a way that, might change your life somehow. Yeah. But he wasn't really telling you what to do. Right. And I didn't want to do that either. Right. I just wanted to lay it out there, and then, you make your choice, and then accept the consequence. Like I said, either way, good or bad. It's not like I, am eating incredibly healthy every day and like living this, utopian kind of life. It doesn't happen. Right. But I also recognize that, okay, if I eat like a really like a deep fried fish taco with a bunch of crap on it, like, I probably shouldn't be doing that every day. And, I might not feel that great afterward, so that's a very basic example, but I think you guys know what I mean. It's really important just to give people information that they can base their decisions on. And this is a way of doing it in a fictional kind of vehicle, right?
Faction, you called it, right?
Faction, yeah.
Faction, I like that.
Yeah, that was brilliant. This reader called it that. And I was like, that is awesome. Yeah. It's because it's this blend of fiction and fact. I think the back of the books has like 30 National Institutes of Health studies. There's like a ton of like resources in the back of the book if you really want to like, dive in. Yeah. But it's a lot of diving. And I did that twofold. I did that both for people who are more interested in getting more info about this, like empirical kind of data. But it was also a bit of a buffer for me, because now when people might kind of bring up, they might find flaws, or they might think, I've heard from a couple folks who think, well, this is just kind of all overblown and, that kind of thing. And I asked them, two people in particular recently, on separate occasions, I was like, well, did you read all the studies in the back? Well, no, did you go in and just check out a few of them? There's like a couple, there's like 3 or 4 that are really key, that are big research studies. And, well, no, I don't need to see that. Right. Mm-hmm. So you learn, as you guys know too, going through this, that like, you're not everything is for everybody.
Right. You know what I mean? Gonna say and not everyone is like emotionally or just able to receive the information at this time.
Exactly.
And they hear it and they get defensive, or
they don't want to believe it.
They don't want to believe it and that's okay. Because at some point, maybe they'll hear it 3 years from now, it'll have an impact on their life.
Yeah. And it might not ever, that's
right.
the other sad part. Yeah.
But I keep thinking about what you said, how these farmers after World War II started using like the pesticides and the fertilizers, and they didn't know the effect that was going to have on our system today, right?
Of course.
And so when we think about how many years it's been going on, and now I think a lot of farmers are starting to understand some of those connections, but minimally. I mean, it's starting, but it's not, sweeping across our nation or anything.
No, I think that it takes some time, like the organic movement's an interesting one because like there's all sorts of, don't get Zach started on the organic thing because like while it's a positive thing in a lot of ways, and in some ways it's really not. But the good thing about the organic movement is, if you're seeing organic spinach in Walmart, like that's tells you something, right? Yeah. Like that there's a market that is willing to buy that, right? And so exactly, and that's what this is all about, which is not a bad thing. Like as long as we can get, Zach, I remember Zach talking about, I can't remember the exact numbers, but the tipping point at which the consumer, the number of or the percentage of consumers that you need to really start making a huge difference here to get to that tipping point is very low. Like it's not a huge percentage of people. Yeah. And so I was like on TV the other night, there was an ad for rice. I think it was rice. It was like Lundberg or something. And it was regenerative, like regeneratively raised rice, like on TV, like it showed the bag, and so that's something, right? Like that's pretty huge. And so, as you said, a lot of farmers are still like grappling with making money, with that sort of approach, especially, in the middle of the country on bigger swaths of land they need a lot of chemical inputs, and they need, there's no way that they think that they can grow anything without that. And I get it, and it makes sense. But I think that I think there's like this burgeoning kind of movement that is, and I'm on the West Coast, of course. I'm like, you have these, like, I call them like the cool kids on the coast, right? Yeah. That like think all these things are like, you need to live this way, look at this. And, like trying to regenerative agriculture is a great example. It's a hard sell for people, in the panhandle of Oklahoma. And so my hope is that we're never going to eliminate herbicides and pesticides completely. And the book isn't saying that we should. I'm not offering that kind of solution. I'm not an expert in that way. It's more about saying, hey, maybe there's another way, right? And so through the whole book, you see kind of what's gone wrong and the impact it's had on our health and our culture and our planet, right? You see all that, but you aren't really presented with any solutions, really. I don't know if you guys noticed that until the very end, there's a bit of hope. But the idea was that book would be all about what we sort of did wrong, maybe not knowing it, but what we did wrong. And then the next book, which I'm working on now, will be about how we're doing it right. Because there's a lot of
doing it right, or what we can do to make it right.
How it's happening right now, where people are making, different kinds of choices on the farming side of things, on the technology side of things, on, one thing that Zach's talking a lot about now is how separation from nature is kind of like the root of a lot of our problems. And I connect to that very deeply, and I think that there's a huge separation from nature can mean a lot of things to people. I don't think we're talking about like walking in a park every other day or something. We're talking about like a whole reconfiguration of how you live your life and how you use technology and the choices that you make. And so it's not all farming per se. It's more about that. The next book does have regenerative agriculture in it. It's a big part of it, but it's using that as more a metaphor for, these other changes that we can make that'll connect us more to nature. And there's lots of writers that are writing about this in a nonfiction way already, like guys like Cal Newport and people like that.
What was the last name?
Cal Newport, Newport. He had a pretty, relatively famous book called Digital Minimalism. And then and some people are writing about it, but but it forces you, like if say, this is a bit off topic, but if, you make this challenge to yourself, say to like not pick up your phone or turn it off for 3 or 4 hours or whatever, it really, it forces you to do something else unless you're in, which also sounds very simple, but it's very true. And so oftentimes that something else can be getting outside and walking around and not being tethered to this device. So the next book is going to, like, in a fictional capacity, it looks at those kinds of things in addition to the regenerative agriculture, right? But another big part of the Ordinary Soil book was with this Jake guy in particular, the main character, he was just making really bad choices, right? And so this next book is going to be about other options. It's not just going to be about, look, this guy's doing this wrong, which he is, and a lot of us are, and that there's no, to me anyway, there's no question that, there's a dearth of there's like a lot of unhappiness, and our political situation, all that stuff aside, there's this lack of joy and this lack of depth and this lack of connection out there. And connection is a funny word. It's kind of like I don't like using it. It's like using the word organic. It's a weird word, but like there's a lack of connection. And
well, community.
Community.
Yeah, that's another word that's tough, right? Because when you say community, like when you say it, I get it. But a lot of people would hear that and be like, oh, she's just, it's like a kumbaya kind of thing, like you can't, what the hell is community? I get it. But and a lot of people don't even realize they're in community when they actually are, right? Which is what you're talking about. But what you're saying is true. Community is a huge part of it, and I think that, I don't know, I think overall with agriculture and societally, there's a big part of our culture that is shifting in a good way. And I think I'm more of an optimist than a lot of people. I think that, I think there's people that are seeing that this isn't working, like how we are living day to day isn't working for us, and they're trying to make changes. And that's a good thing, I mean.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, we live in these communities, we're both in Minneapolis, or suburbs of Minneapolis in Minnesota. Right. And you live in a community where, you have your grocery store and you have, the things that you have, and to go outside of that and go to, your farmer's market or meet your local farmers or whatever, you have to make that conscious choice to like step outside of your realm, I guess.
Comfort zone.
Some of those things, if you want to plant tomatoes in your backyard or whatever it is, it's not the community. The city is not set up, like we don't have sidewalks. They're putting some in finally, but like, we could build our cities with a different vision. And I think we could live out some of these things easier for people.
Absolutely. And in the meantime, the challenge is, what do you do, right? If you're in your suburb of Minneapolis and you don't have a sidewalk, like what are you going to do, right? That's a tough ask. In the new book, there's a place here in California that anybody on the West Coast will recognize, who travels at all. I-5 is like the interstate that runs up the gut of the country, or not country, sorry, state. And just when you get into the Central Valley, where there's a lot of agriculture happening, there's these ginormous feedlots. They used to be the Harris Ranch, and I think they sold it to somebody else. But that's like In-N-Out Burger's kind of main, which is a big chain here. It's their main source of beef. And I am by no means a vegetarian or anything. I eat everything. But like when you're driving past these feedlots, it is incredibly, like, the stench is nuts. And it has been since, like, I was, I'm 52 now, since I was, I remember as a teenager going skiing or whatever on trips with my parents, and you would drive by and everybody would roll up the window and like cover up their noses and, everything. Cause it's that bad. And part of it, and so it's just cattle on top of each other, right? So you contrast that with the way that I've seen cattle raised in other parts of the country, including Idaho, where I spend a lot of time. And you don't have that stench. You don't have that kind of like life living on top of each other. And the reason I'm telling you this is that a lot of times I feel like in cities you have that same kind of stench happening. You just don't smell it, right? It's just a different kind of it. And there's another way to do it, which is these cattle that are living in a very different sort of environment in a different way that seems to be, more akin to how we are supposed to be living. And the guy in the book is talking about that. And there's a character in Ordinary Soil named Adam, who's like my favorite character in that book, actually. And he is a big part of the next book. And so some guys telling him about that. Like, look at these feedlots. Like, people aren't supposed to be on top of each other like this. And Adam says, well, what else are they supposed to do? Right? Like, this is how things have been set up, which is what your point is, right? Your point is that these cities have been built in a way that don't allow for, any other kind of living. And all you can do is like make a decision on a personal level as an individual not to be in that environment. And that's really tough. Your life might not allow that. Your family, however things are structured, might not allow that to happen. So it's this weird, it's this, I agree with you completely. I think not a lot of times, but like cities can be a problem, like I get the New York Times every Sunday. That's the news I get, right? I get the print version. And because I try to stay off of online news. And I read these stories of the city and what's happening in New York. And I love New York. Like I used to play there all the time. It was a great place to visit. But I get these images of just folks living on top of each other. And how are they going to plant a tomato? Like how are they going to plant a plant anywhere? Like how's that ever going to change? Right. So I don't have the answer for that. I think that it's just, you guys are kind of living in it now in a way, right? Like, what would you do? What's your option? Your option is moving, which probably isn't an option for a lot of people, or, figuring out a way to incorporate nature more into your everyday life, that's an individual decision that's tough, like you said, the first steps of anything. I mean, kind of full of cliches at this point, but like the first steps are the hardest, right? Of anything. And so going out to your farmer's market, taking that first step out to do that on a Sunday morning when you'd rather just lay there and watch football or whatever, that's a hard step to take. But once you start doing it, it gets incredibly easier, right?
And
it's rewarding. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah. I mean, Minneapolis has great farmers markets. I mean, I'm blessed that I have 2 or 3 farmers that I can buy so much high quality eggs, milk, raw milk and poultry and beef from. Right. And not everyone has it, but it does just take a little bit of effort. But seek out, and we'll link up some of these episodes that we've had local farmers on for anyone that's local, but there's national ways to find local farmers and have a conversation with them, because they would love to talk about it too. The ones that are doing regenerative agriculture or not using chemicals and pesticides in their and their farming. Once you get that ball rolling, it just keeps rolling, right? Like a snowball. It's amazing. Yes. And you will notice it will taste different and better. And there's a reason why, just from a quality standpoint. But, Alex, we could keep going on. And I'm actually already really excited to read your second book. You'll probably have to come back on again. How can we individually, and you kind of said it, like, it's daunting to think about this from a big picture standpoint, and much needs to be done with our agriculture and farming because we are so disconnected from the soil. But how can we, collectively, individually start to move the needle a little bit? How can we start to turn the ship? Because we do need to get it back. And I know we do also want you have some verses in the book. You are a singer and a songwriter, and we thought it would be fun for you to share a little bit of that with our listeners today. Right. I think that, like so many things, that the change starts on an individual level. And we can talk about it till the cows come home, but it's just talking, and that's what drives me nuts about politics and media and that kind of stuff, is that it's so surface in terms of it's just a bunch of words flying back and forth when nothing really matters unless you're doing something. And one of these other books I wrote for another project called For the Sender
is called like the subtitle is called Love Is, and then in parentheses it says not a feeling, right? Because it's not, it's what you're doing for that person. That is what real love is. And so I think that as far to make a real change and to right the ship, as you say, it starts with that individual, that person, you committing just a little bit of your energy and your resources to exploring this way of living. And by this way of living, we mean a way of living that's more connected to, you know, where your food's coming from and the person growing it. And you know, as we kind of talked about before, doing it yourself in a way and seeing what that's like, even if it's just, you know, a plant that you can harvest on your windowsill that gets some light, right? Mm-hmm. Just that act, that very small act can be an incredibly transformative process. You know, if you're planting a seed and you're watching it grow, right? It goes back to what you get out, what you put in, right? Like if you take responsibility for that, and you know, it reminds me of when I was in, I don't know how old I was, 5th grade, 4th grade. I don't know, when we would do some sort of project like that at school, you know, and be planting. I don't know if they were chia seeds or I don't know. I don't remember, but I remember the magic of seeing something come up out of the ground, right? And it was very there's something very powerful in that. And then if you can actually consume that and eat it and use it for your own life force, you start making these connections, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, here at the house, we've got, I mean, I can't really show you now, but we've got we have an orchard in the back and we've got huge gardens out front that we eat off of seasonally. You know, we grow it seasonally according to, you know, whatever the earth is telling us we can do. And we try to get as much food as we can off that. And it makes a huge difference. You know, if you go out and you pick a salad and you eat it right then, or you know, we have hens in the back, you know, you go back and you get eggs before breakfast, and like it's an incredibly connective experience. And not everybody can have a hen house, and not everybody can, you know, have a garden out front or an orchard. But I do think that many of us could try growing something, you know, even in the house, and see what that's like. Just that process, you know, like I think if there was one takeaway I would give to people, it would be just to try that and see. And we're in the season now where you can do it, right? We're in, what is it, June, right? So just about wherever you are in the country, you could try doing that and see what happens.
You can start, you know, small, right? Like I'm growing basil and oregano and dill and all these herbs, and it's like a joy for me to go outside while I'm cooking dinner and like cut the things I need and use them to cook with. It's like,
isn't that cool? I mean, it's crazy. It's like it's
and
so...
you can do it in a condo. We lived in Chicago before here, and in our condo we had little pots on our deck and we just grew herbs. You know, just pick your favorite one.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that process. And if you fail, fine, just do it again. You know, like that's the other part of this.
I mean, there are going to be squirrels and bugs and bunnies and all the things that attack. Right?
That's right. And that's just part of the process, right? But just that is getting you away from a screen, right? Or getting you away from, it's getting you away from that and into like this more magical kind of existence, like seeing this stuff grow and then being able to like use it and eat it. And I don't know, it sounds, you know, when we're talking about it, it sounds so sort of, I don't want to say small, but so kind of minimal. But it's actually, as you guys know, it's huge. It's like it can be such a transformative thing. Like I said before, it's really, and so the reason that I think it's a good idea to do that is because it changes the lens through which you look at everything else you're eating and the way that you're living, you know. And of course, you're not always going to be able to buy from the farmer's market. You're not always going to be able to buy organic or non-processed food, or like everybody can just relax about that. None of us are able to do that all the time, right? But it like can change the way you look at it. And I think that's all that we're looking for. I think one of Wayne's, God, what was that saying? He had a few of these, like, the when you change the way, oh, that's what it was.
Yes.
When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And it's extremely true. And I think right now, I don't see like our country or, this state or anything like that in nearly as dire of a circumstance or through that kind of lens as other people do. And I think this is why, right? I think it's because I, for one, am not on the media as much as I used to be, but I'm also like the focus, because I'm not on that, the focus has changed to what we're growing or what we're eating or what we're thinking about or what I'm writing, like all those kinds of things, right?
Mhm.
And it tends to give you a much more positive outlook on things, right? If you're sitting there watching CNN or Fox News or whatever you're doing all day long, that's going to affect your lens, right?
Yes.
And being on TV or on your phone or on your computer, it's not healthy. And
I think that's really important, good advice that I need to take to heart more, and I'm sure many of our listeners do.
Yeah.
Well, your sounds like you're just so much more in tune with what you need, your innate knowing, your body, and you're not focused on the external as much. And you get
right.
It's not like you're completely disconnected from the world, but you're not over consuming to the point that it is taking up
Making
so
you
much
crazy.
headspace and not letting you dig into your
and
knowing,
I was just talking to someone about this earlier today. But what's funny about that is, all this stuff that we are consuming now via media or the political landscape or the social media, everything that we're taking in, so little of it we have control over, for one thing, right? These things that we get all fired up about and yell at each other about, we have very little control over, for one thing, right? That is it. And not only that, but this is something that really got driven home to me as I started getting more away from media. The direct impact that a lot of these huge inflammatory kind of things have on my life is minimal. Like it's really minimal. Sure, it matters who's the governor of the state or who the president is. Like that stuff matters, but on a day-to-day basis, if I don't let that be part of my internal conversation, it's amazing how little it matters. It doesn't. People tend to not like where they are in their lives a lot of times, and so they start focusing on those things because it gives them something to connect to and to get emotionally invested in and all that kind of stuff, because they don't want to do the work with the other stuff, which is their relationships, right? And how they're treating themselves and their friends, their spouse, their bodies, that kind of stuff. They don't want to look at that as much. It's a lot easier to look at the screen than to look at that stuff. But once you start looking at that stuff and making it better, whatever that means to you, the screen, whatever's coming through the screen doesn't matter nearly as much. I'm not saying it doesn't matter at all, but it doesn't really, that's kind of the funny thing I've noticed over the last maybe couple of years, and like you said, I know what's going on in the world. I mean, I talk to people, I get the paper. It's not like I don't know what's happening. But I don't need to know it, 24 hours a day.
And I think that just, kind of to wrap this up, but I think that applies to a lot of people out there who probably are our listeners, who are even just looking for health and wellness advice. We're consuming so much, whether it's like the newest product or the newest fad or the newest supplement or whatever it is. It's all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's taking away from you actually being able to make those changes that you want sometimes when
Totally.
you're so externally focused on what other people are doing.
Yeah. 100%.
I think that can apply to a wide variety of topics, really.
Absolutely. All sorts of things. It's just kind of looking inward, right? It's kind of instead of outward for these things.
Yeah.
But, so I have Wayne to thank, I think, for a lot of that, because as a kid, even I saw his PBS special when I was probably, I don't know, one of them when I was 20 or 21. I think I was in Seattle, and he had a PBS special, and one of the things that his things for better living or something on this list was don't die with your music still in you. And I thought, right. And I was like, well, wait a minute, I've got music in me. I want, literally, I want to get it out there. And so from an early age, I was sort of open to that way of thinking, and I think that has helped me as I've gotten older, for sure. Because I don't buy. I tend not to buy into a lot of the other more temporary sort of pleasures out there. I try not to do that. And media is certainly one of them. You know, it's and the notifications that are popping up on your phone and everything, right? Those little dopamine hits are pretty powerful. So
Yeah.
So Alex, we have to start to wrap this up here, but we would love to just hear you sing a couple verses from the book.
Oh, right.
And then, you know, we can close out. That'd be a great way to close this interview out, this conversation.
Let's see. Let me think about how this one.
I mean, it doesn't have to be from the book.
No, I think it should be. I'm trying to remember Ordinary Soil. So at the beginning of the book, this guy Jake, he's got this song playing on the car stereo. You see this hole? I dug it deep with these two hands, black as coal, like forever sleep. I hope you understand. I'm just a working man, tired of fighting the land. I'm gonna let these bones turn to oil in this ordinary soil.
Thank you. That was so
Hopefully
fun to hear you.
Hopefully you could hear that okay.
Yeah, that was wonderful. And it's something different. We haven't done that yet on the podcast. So
oh, right on. Well, the next time
being the first. Yeah.
I'll have a couple other things ready for you next time we talk.
Perfect. So we know you're not on social media, but where can people find you and check out the book, purchase the book? I think it's on Audible, or it will be very soon. I think
so you can go to Alex Woodard, AlexWoodard.com. Everything's there. So there's at least like a digital presence there on the website, and it will be Scott Brick, who's done like John Grisham and Tom Clancy and Robert Ludlum, like all those authors, is narrating this book this month. So it should be available on Audible, I think by the end of July is the plan.
Okay. So by the time that everyone's listening to this episode.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It will be available on Audible. Great. We'll link all that up in the show notes too.
Cool.
So Alex, as we wrap up this conversation, we'd love to hear from you. What does the art of living well mean to you?
Oh, wow. Well, I think the art of living well to me means staying as present as possible, and not in a new agey woo-woo kind of way. I mean, like as present as possible and being very aware of how you're moving, how you're speaking, how you're eating, how you're treating yourself, how you're treating the people around you, like in the moment, right? As much in that present moment as possible. I think that if you can string enough of those moments together, then the art of living well kind of takes care of itself. But that's what it's about for me. It's about not staying too much in the past and not staying in the future, just like staying here as much as you can.
Beautiful.
Love that.
Yes. This has been just like enlightening conversation, and just, kind of really grounding too. I just feel very calm now after this. I want to go outside, eat my lunch, and sit in the grass, just watch the tomatoes that are growing slowly here in Minnesota.
Well, I appreciate you having me, and being open to talking about this kind of stuff. I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important to us, and it's a super important message. So thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate it.
Of course. All right, we'll do it again.
And we hope you get to take your private jet to the Maldives.
Yeah, it's actually waiting right now. I kind of got to go because it's actually in the driveway. So I mean, it's amazing. So I'll let you go. I'll let you guys know how that all works out for me over the next 24 hours. Yeah.
Sounds